Okay, hi everyone. I'm Roberto Weber. I'm a behavioral economist who studies questions at the intersection of morality and economics. So, economists in the markets that we study have often been assumed to be entirely uninterested in questions of morality. Adam Smith, the intellectual founder of modern economics, famously wrote that self-interest alone is all that you need in order for prices, supply, and demand to guide societies to efficient outcomes that are the best that we can obtain. But is that true? Is it really the case that morality doesn't play a role in economics, in our economic behavior? That's the question that my research attempts to answer. So I'll start with an example from labor markets, where the supply of and demand for workers come together to determine employment and wages. And I want to start with a thought experiment. So think to yourself, would you take a job marketing tobacco products to children? Now, some of you might say, like my daughter, when I asked her earlier, might say, no, never, under no circumstances. Others might say, sure, where do I sign up? And others may say, well, depends, what's the price? What are you offering? What's the wage? And so this is an important question because if we are concerned about the morality or the perceived morality of the work that we engage in, and if some people are unwilling to do that work and other people are only willing to do it if the wages are high enough, then that aversion should impact the supply of workers and mean that we can detect things like higher wages in industries that are perceived to be more immoral. So that's what we set out to test. And the way we do this is we start off by surveying a large set of people about their perceptions. What do they perceive to be moral industries and immoral industries? So we gave them a list of industries, some of which are listed here, and asked them to rate them and evaluate them. So we obtained ratings of what people consider to be moral industries and what people consider to be immoral industries. These are not our judgments, but rather just the ratings of everyday people. So now that we constructed this list, we used data from the Swiss Federal Statistical Office on wages across industries to see if we actually detect something like a wage premium for work that is at least perceived as immoral. So this comparison shows us that among the industries that are perceived as immoral by this separate group of people that rated them, we see that there is a wage premium and, in fact, higher wages. This is not driven by any single industry like finance, but rather a pattern that occurs across many industries. And this is also something that persists when we control for characteristics of the workers, like their experience, their gender, their education, and for characteristics of the firms in the industries, like their size and their revenues. So it does seem that there is something about industries that people generally perceive as immoral that results in higher wages. We additionally looked at people's willingness to work in these industries, and we measured people's desire to avoid doing things that are immoral by measuring the extent to which people were willing to lie for money using a simple experimental task. And what we found was that people who are less concerned with morality in their own behavior also tend to find employment in these industries that other people rate as immoral less aversive and are more willing to go and work in these industries. And so in terms of a takeaway, if you manage a firm in one of these industries that people perceive as immoral, whether or not what you actually do has any moral implications, that perception alone can be something that raises the cost of hiring workers, makes it harder to attract workers, and potentially means that the workers you attract are the ones least concerned with morality and ethics. So let me give you another example then about consumer behavior. And let me start here with a thought experiment again. So think about a value that you consider to be important. It could be gender equality, it could be patriotism, it could be religion, it could be football, something that you really value. Now, would you prefer to buy a product as a consumer from a firm whose owners support your values or who publicly take positions that conflict with those values? If it's the case that there's a difference between the two, then that means that values are entering into your economic decision-making. And we can see whether or not consumers are actually willing to pay more to to buy products from firms or sellers who support and promote the things that they consider valuable from a moral perspective. So the way that we got at this question was we studied an online sample of consumers in China who we offered the opportunity to buy products from sellers in the United Kingdom. Specifically, we asked them how much they were willing to pay to buy a product from someone. The important piece of information that we used in this study was we told them how the British seller, the person in the UK, had responded on a survey question that we asked them about something related to values. Specifically, we asked the sellers in the UK the degree to which they agreed with or disagreed with a statement reflecting China's official position on human rights. And so the sellers in the UK saw this statement and they could either indicate agreement or disagreement or different degrees. And what we did was we showed the Chinese consumers the statements provided by, or the degree of agreement provided by these sellers in the UK. And what we found was that the consumers in China were willing to pay more, roughly twice as much, to purchase from a seller in the UK that they didn't know, who would express support for the Chinese position on human rights, relative to sellers who had not expressed such a position. The additional thing that we looked at was what happens to the positions stated by sellers in the UK when they know that they have the opportunity to sell to someone in China. And when you knew that you could potentially sell a product to someone in China, but that they could observe your answer to this question, we see a shift in the direction of greater support for the Chinese position on human rights. And so what this tells us is not just that moral values influence our market behavior, but also that the opportunities for market exchange can in turn influence people's at least statements of and support for different moral values. So returning then to the motivating question, right, is it the case that we care about broader notions of morality and that this shows up in our economic behavior? The answer of my research indicates that this is yes. Right? But that still a lot remains to be done to better understand the degree to which we as consumers, workers, entrepreneurs care about moral values in our economic behavior. Thank you very much.